So welcome to Rockefeller College of Public Affairs and Policy Virtual Career Series. My name is Yolanda Negron Rivera, and I'm the director of the career office here, and I'm joined with some awesome staff that are also going to serve as a support for you as well. I have Joan Marceau, who's our undergraduate internship coordinator, and our graduate assistant as well, Maura Dehaney, who's here to help answer questions along the way. So a lot of you are very interested in today's topic, which I'm excited to share with you because I do understand how important it is to make sure that you are appropriately vetting an employer to make sure they're legitimate, but at the same time, making sure that elements of inclusivity, and that's been a lot of on people's minds lately, has been how do I ensure that an employer is not only stating that they're supportive of diversity and inclusion, but they're actually demonstrating it. So today I'm hoping to give you some practical strategies that are going to allow you to vet. Please note the recording will be shared with you and the slides. So if you can take notes, and that's perfectly fine. You can take pictures of the slides, but if it saves you some time from doing extra work, know that the follow-up will happen. So I'm going to take a minute to share my screen. You won't see something for a quick second while I get the slides up, and then we'll start from there. And again, questions can be easily put into the chat. So feel free to put those in there, but at one point we're such a small group, I'd be happy to have you unmute your lines. Okay, so I just want to make sure, can the slides be seen? Yep, okay, I'm seeing some shake of the heads. Awesome. Okay. All right, so let's jump into this topic. Now, let me tell you, I honestly had a lot of fun. This is the first time I think our career office has done a training on this, so I'm excited to share with you a lot of what I was learning. I had a great opportunity to attend a virtual career conference over the summer from the National Career Development Association, and they had such great tips and strategies. So I gave some resources at the end that I thought might be helpful if you want to learn more. And if I think of other ones to add in the follow-up communication, I'd be happy to. So I've already done introductions, so we're going to jump right into what did you say or asked about what you were hoping to gain out of today's session. So here's a few things that I thought are helpful to frame your thought process for today. A lot of you were interested in learning how to identify any red flags concerning diversity, equity, and inclusion, whether it was in the interview process, whether it was on the onboarding, and I don't want to assume anybody knows what that means, but that's when you're starting to work for an employer and how they bring you on board. That's where they get the terminology. How do they orient you? How do you begin your job? A lot of times people think of onboarding as like a 90-day process in some ways, 30, 60, 90-day process. So how do they do that as part of orientation? And also through the recruitment process. So that's part of where I felt like everybody kind of bucketed. Understanding what signs are obvious and subtle. You know, that I thought was such a great point that someone had written and what they were hoping to gain out of it, because some signs are pretty easy to find and others you might have to do a little bit more informed research. And lastly, how to know if an employer is interested or invested in diversity, equity, inclusion as well was a big thing that people wanted to say, what should I be looking for? So those were the kind of bigger themes when I was looking at everyone's intent, and they're all very important, and I'm pretty confident I covered those, but I'm happy to have people ask questions as we progress. So I always love to do this in sessions. Here's what I know as of today, September 15th. Okay, so here's what we know as of right now. Companies want to increase their pipeline to access a more diverse candidate pool. And this is something that has been on the minds and intent of a lot of recruiters, but even more so now with the social justice movement, it just seems everyone is focused on doing this with more intention, more commitment, and wanting to make sure that they're known for doing this, okay? They do also recognize that they have had their own challenges in attracting diverse candidates. So for example, I won't name employers, but when I was doing employer town halls over the summer, there were some employers that said our company recognizes that we are not diverse racially, and they named that. And as a result, we don't tend to attract a certain pool that we're looking for. And we've been battling this for years because we may be a large firm, we may be a small firm, but it just seems like we just haven't figured it out. So part of what they've really looked at is that they know that this has been hard for them, and they were very open and receptive to better strategies of how to handle it. there's more reflection and intention as to how they are doing this, but also the why they are doing this. There's a lot of trainings that a lot of companies have been doing around how to build a more inclusive company. A lot of it is racially charged, but I will be fair to students who do not also fit within being racially diverse. Maybe there's other forms of diversity, whether it's in disability or with gender identity and expression. So a lot of companies have moved, but there's a lot of factors to consider here. So I don't want to get too in depth in what I've heard so far. Spammers tend to come out more often during uncertain times, and that is so unfortunate. But there are folks who tend to try to take advantage of people during this time frame in ways that you would not anticipate. So I'm going to give you some practical things to think about so that you can understand if an employer who's outreaching to you is legitimate enough for you to apply to or to provide personal information of. And the clues are there if you know where to find them. And that's something else that I know. The more informed you are with this knowledge, the better you apply this knowledge, the better your application process and hopefully onboarding to an employer that matches your values will help you. So does that bring up any questions so far? Is there anything in the chat? I think I'm still introductory, but okay. All right. So I'm going to just start off with legitimacy of an employer. Part of it is because I feel like this tends to be a little bit more concrete versus the other one is much more involved. This tends to be faster, so I want to focus on this early on, and the rest of the presentation is really going to focus on how to identify diversity, equity, and inclusion. So to start off with, here's an example of a scenario that has happened to people before. So a representative from a valid company contacts you about a job, okay? You're all excited, you get to do a phone interview, and then you're told you're hired. Congratulations, right? Or so we think. They send you a bonus signing check. Basically, you are told you have to provide your name, your address, your social security number, and your banking information for direct deposit, basically for a paycheck. You decide to provide the information, so you do. You deposit the check and then find out about 3 to 10 days later that the check was fraudulent, so it was a phony, and meanwhile your bank account is cleared out. That has happened to people before. No one that I've worked with, no one that Jones worked with, thankfully, hopefully no one Maura has ever worked with in her career experience, but unfortunately we've heard of these situations and there's ways to avoid these pitfalls. Okay, so a couple of low-hanging pieces of information that can help you to identify if an employer is a legit employer. Keep an eye out for a working website. Websites that are really, and I would be really honest, ones that have broken links everywhere, that just don't seem to provide enough information about who are they, perhaps their organizational structure. Maybe they don't have any information on any recent press releases. They don't have a social media account for some reason that gives them up to date on what they're doing. There's all these different kind of hints that you'll pick up very quickly that either they're putting on a face, but it's not a full face, and you're kind of like, this just doesn't seem right. Stuff isn't adding up. But definitely if the website is really broken up and it's not giving you all the information, that should be a red flag. It is important that you look for a company that does not have a non-generic email domain of the users connected to the company's profile. So for example, because we work at the University of Albany, all of us have an @albany.edu, right? But if I were to say I worked for Albany, but all of a sudden I have a Yahoo account that's not connected, that seems more personal, but I swear I work for the University of Albany, and I'm not trying to be sarcastic, I'm being honest. Some people be like, oh, okay, maybe they're having trouble with their .edu account. No problem, I'll connect with you on here. Be really careful with that. A lot of the employers, just to bring you up to speed with some resources you already have on Handshake, for example, all of the Handshake profiles have been approved by the employer relations team or by someone who has staff member administrative access to Handshake. And each employer has a certain percentage of a score that allows them to be vetted in the sense of how legit and complete their profile is. If a recruiter were to have emails that were not associated with their company's domain, they would really get red flagged and may not have an approved profile on Handshake. So that's one way to start to consider if in fact this is legit. You should check if they have a profile that is full and filled out on Handshake. So I'm already jumping on my own advice to all of you, but definitely check that out. That is a tool for you on there. Keep in mind certain pieces of information. Where's the location? Do they have a company description, company email address? The phone numbers are pretty good indicators that they're legit. But at the same time, I would go off of Handshake and go actually check the employer's website and validate the information you're seeing. Of course, you're going to see this at some point in the slide, but when in doubt, you should work with us. Please do, because I've had students who've reached out to us before and said, I'm not sure about this, and I can vouch on behalf of someone. And if I have questions, we have other networks at the university to say, hey, this seems a little bit sketchy. Can you give us some insider to let us know? Some other great resources that you should consider too, which are completely legit for you to use, LinkedIn for sure, Glassdoor for sure, and Indeed is a great way to read online reviews of other companies and to get to hear some insider information. Sometimes by doing some of this kind of bigger picture research, you may find that people are putting reviews of these companies and saying if they're legit or not. Caution I would give a little bit here though, keep in mind that sometimes there are disgruntled people who've worked at employers that they just haven't had a good experience with, but they are a good company. They just perhaps weren't happy, or maybe they were fired, or maybe something that was just controversial that happened during their time there and they put an anonymous review. So there's other ways to check to make sure that you can get some other perspectives. But again, these are good and legitimate websites to use. But when in doubt, there's other resources that can help complement, just in case you see something that maybe raises an eyebrow and says, I'm not sure about this review. You can always check in other resources. So here are some other strategies, and this is really kind of rounds about a bit about the legitimacy strategies. Again, I said this was a shorter part of the presentation, but just as important. Informational interviews with staff and alumni. Now, if you're not familiar with these, informational interviews are an opportunity for you about 20 to 35 minutes or 25 to 30 minutes with a conversation with either a staff member or with an alum who maybe worked for that employer or has a connection with that employer, and you're just asking them questions to get to know more about their career path, more about their experience with that company, and to just get a better sense of things. It's a great use of time, especially right now with so many people applying for internships and what available jobs are, and with an uncertain job market, to be better informed to ask people who are working for that company. So 25 to 30 minutes to save you enough time to decide, am I going to fill out that application? Am I going to write a resume and a customized cover letter? You know, you really want to be better informed. This is a great strategy for you to use. And if you've never done one of these, reach out to Joan, myself, Maura. We have career handbook materials that actually do highlight best strategies on how to do one of these. So know that we can help you. Network with peers, with faculty, with family, friends. Use your contacts around you. There is no shame in saying, hey, you know, Uncle so-and-so or cousin so-and-so or, you know, whoever, I'm really interested in this organization. I know you mentioned it recently and you know, over a Zoom call. I'm going to keep it super relevant to right nowadays and just say, you mentioned this before, you heard I was searching. Could you tell me more about that? Can we chat a little bit? Totally fine to do it. I know for some of you right now, you may be taking classes remotely, or perhaps you're doing hybrid, or maybe you are in person, but it's totally fine to reach out to those that you see in your classes or in your faculty to have these dialogues to just gain a better insight of the employers that you're eyeing. Of course, you always want to reach out to the career office. We are certainly here to help you, and we do this work often. So we may even know students who are interning or who have full-time jobs in those organizations that we could help outreach to you. And if you're not familiar and you're one of our Rockefeller College students, we have a director of alumni relations who also has access to a plethora of alumni. And sometimes maybe we don't have a connection with that employer from the top of her head, but she's willing to reach out to Alumni Association and see what they can run as a search to see if anybody comes up. So there's a lot of different ways that we can do this with you. And last but not least, knowing about UCAN, the University's Career Advisory Network, is such a fantastic tool. If you haven't used it already, it's a free resource for you as a student. You create a profile of yourself, and that will generate for you different leads of alumni that may be potential contacts that can help you in your career. And you can schedule meetings right there on the platform because they provide their own availability. So it's a great way, again, in this digital age where over the last time I checked, Department of Labor said about 1/3 of the country is working remotely. Think about how many people are connected to their computers right now that would welcome a 25-minute conversation with someone who would love help in their career. And Joan and I can attest to this, and probably more too. People are not afraid to talk about themselves right now. That makes them feel good, and why not? So use this time to connect with people while they're connected digitally, okay? So this really hones in a lot of the practical strategies with vetting an employer for legitimacy. The rest is really going to focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion. I just do want to open it up for a quick second to see if there any questions came in the chat that would be worth me pausing for a minute. Nothing yet?
No questions in the currently. Does anyone have any meeting?
Okay, great. If there are questions, please feel free to post them in there. I'm happy to talk through those. But again, these are some quicker, low-hanging strategies. Now we're really going to get into the diversity, equity, and inclusion belonging piece, which I know people are eager to chat more about. Okay. So this takes more work, and honestly, everyone, when I was doing this and putting all this, I realized how much information is out there. So I wanted to think, if I was a candidate right now on the job market, how would I strategize my time? Hopefully this gives you some steps to do that. So one of the clear ways to start to identify if an employer is really committed to this, and there's ways to determine action, you want to read their mission and their vision statements. Sometimes when you're reading a position description for a company, they will actually have the diversity statement on their position description. Typically, it's lower on the bottom. I don't know how much people feel that that's a great thing to leave it all the way at the bottom. There could be controversy with that too, but it's there, right? If you go on a company's website, whether it's in public sector or private sector, in their mission statement, they will typically have this somewhere in that. That's a really good indicator because it gives you a clear sense of what are they focused and devoted to. Now, I'm a big believer, you can put a mission and a vision out there, but you have to match some action to it. So I'm going to show you how to identify that as well. Okay, so that's one piece, is read their mission and vision statements. What is the purpose of the company? Where are they headed? That's what I'm talking about when I say mission and vision statements. Then that's where the diversity statements can be either wedded in either one of those, which is the second bullet that I've highlighted there. Next position, look at the organization's leadership structure. And if you've never looked at that, that's basically looking at their staff structure. Some companies have it very transparent, where you can go to their staff page and get to see overall who is their CEO, who is their executive director, who is their commissioner, all the way down to the individual titles of everybody else who works in the organization. And really some reflective questions you could ask yourself is, are folks like you represented in the leadership structure? Now, again, I want to be fair to students. Folks like you might be that perhaps for me, I'll speak about myself, I'm a Puerto Rican female. So as I'm looking at the list of an employer, do I happen to see people who may look like me, who may resemble like me? Maybe they happen to have a Spanish last name like me. I don't know, because again, just because you have a Spanish last name doesn't mean necessarily you're Hispanic, okay? So but there might be hints to be like, oh, okay, wow, they have a pretty big presence of people who may look like me, okay? Now, also keeping in mind that maybe it's not what it's important to you as a racial identity, maybe it's finding out if they have support for individuals who have a disability. Some disabilities can be very visible for people to identify, some may be invisible. And so that might be much harder to discern from something like this strategy. But again, just knowing that maybe this might work to help you to see the makeup of it might be helpful. And here's another hack. You might use this to then find people and then match them on their LinkedIn profile if they have one. See what they're commenting on. See what their profile is saying. Are there things that they are passionate about? Do they share certain articles? Are they committed to certain movements, perhaps? You never know. LinkedIn is a professional brand, so depending on what hints or clues you're getting from that might give you a sense of what that person is bringing into the workplace, perhaps. Also, You want to take some time if an organization has a board of directors or a trustees. That's another group that helps to oversee the leadership and keeps an organization or company accountable. What's the makeup of that group? A lot of board of directors or trustees tend to represent the community, or at least they try to. You know, some boards can be as big as 25, some can be very small as 5 or 6 people. But what is the makeup of that? Because if you know that the head person reports to that larger group, and that larger group isn't reflective of the type of people you would want to work with, might be something that could be a red flag for you. Okay. Another piece, strategic diversity planning that includes metrics and includes individuals like you as part of the metrics. So what I mean by that is every company and their mission and vision, and hopefully they do this, right? Some companies may not have a strategic plan, which kind of puts into question where are they going. But, you know, if they have a plan that really talks about how intentionally they're building in a pipeline of diversity, how are they committing to this? What are they trying to move toward? And do they have clear goals and metrics outlined over the next 5, 10, 20 years, whatever it is? But if they have that, that's really important. And some people will put that front and center on their websites and talk about that. Or maybe they have some type of press release, or maybe they have an annual report of their organization. Now, nonprofits are common to do this. They have this annual report and a nice portfolio where they get to show kind of their improvement as an organization, both in the community and within their own structure. So if you find that, that might be very valuable for you to better understand what exactly it looks like, their intentions behind this. Another clue, making sure that they have identified professional staff member to assist with recruitment and retention, potentially of people from diverse backgrounds. Do they have a recruiter that's actually assigned to do this? Now, I put a little star next to that because I want to be fair that some employers may have the resources and capacity to hire someone whose sole job is to do this. Some companies don't have the resources to do that. So that's why I said be careful to not use that as your ding against applying for a company, because they may not be there just yet. They might find other ways to supplement it. But there are some recruiters, for example, one of our employers that we work with, Deloitte Consulting, they actually have an assigned person who's charged with creating and maintaining that pipeline of talent coming in, of diverse talent coming in. So again, just a good note for that. Any questions pop in? No? Okay. Some other things to consider it, and I was really excited to read about this, and I know I have it on my notes from the other slide, but some other pieces or clues for you to consider is also looking at the company's policies. Now, there's this interesting workshop that I virtually got to attend that talked about grooming practices, and it might be on my next slide, I think, which we'll get to in a second. But it talks about grooming policies in the workplace. So some of you may be familiar with, and I'm going to kind of scroll down a little to see who's on camera to see shaking of heads. But is anyone familiar with the Crown Act? Some people, yes. Okay, good. Well, I'm glad somebody said yes. Okay, so for others who don't, I get a lot of questions about this, especially because I have outed myself as a Puerto Rican female. So my hair may look a certain way right now, but it's actually quite curly when it's very natural. And when I leave it that way, I will tell you there are politics around hair in the workplace. So the Crown Act was actually passed in December, I'm pretty sure I'm right, December 15th of 2019. I think I might have my date correct. It's very recent, but it was an act to help with not discriminating against natural hair in the workplace. And there is such a thing. So if you haven't heard about it, please know that it is. And actually, I have it on my next slide. There are certain states that have actually implemented this act, more coming on board, but that's why I want to bring up to you, which we'll get to the Crown Act in a second, is just company policies that are around grooming policies in the workplace. For some people, this can be a very important factor because it talks about the culture of the organization and how it better speaks to you as an employee. So if you yourself find that these policies do not support you as a professional coming into it, that may raise some red flags for you. Also, I want to put out there, I've worked with students as an intern in higher ed, I actually worked with a lot of transgender identified students, and restrooms were a challenge for some of our folks that I worked with. So what kind of restroom policies were there available to those companies? How did they support individuals who identified with the LGBTQ plus identified community? And that also was something that I thought would be very telling for people going onto the market to say, how am I included or not included in the structure, in the physical even structure, when we're thinking of restrooms in this workplace? COVID-19 accommodations, I wanted to bring this up to speed. Not that I had a lot of data to look at for this, but I do recognize that maybe years down the road when we reflect back on this time, that a lot of policies came about on who got to telework, who got accommodations to stay home, and for what reasons and for why. We're seeing so much disparity in how even within one employer, how this is being handled, because this is such new territory. So again, God forbid there's another type of global health crisis as big as this virus. What are the policies around this and the accommodations that may influence if an employee would move forward with applying or not? So knowing the company's policies is important. And I could imagine as a candidate, you're like, well, how do I even find that insider information out? We'll get to that. I promise you'll find ways to figure that out. The next item I want to put on your radar is budgeting. So is there a budget dedicated to diverse programming? Some companies, and I should have put an asterisk next to this, actually have a budget that is dedicated to do intentional training and development of their staff. And they have various programming. And I'm going to get to in the next slide what that programming could potentially look like. Again, no reflection on employers who can't have the access to do this, but you do want to keep in mind that some people have the resources to do it and some don't. They have to use very low-hanging, more cost-effective ways. They can't do very expensive, bring in outside trainers to do a lot of this type of development. But if they have a budget dedicated, that's a great sign to their commitment to this. So here's what I was bringing up about the Crown Act. So thinking about when I thought about being a candidate and how important it is of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, it also made me think of, depending on where you're searching for jobs and geographically where you're choosing to look for work, you want to keep in mind what laws may be affecting you in those states in considering certain employers. That's why I put the Crown Act in here, because depending if a state has that as an act that they stand for, perhaps that's something that's important to you going into place of employment who has that as part of their state. Maybe if you're going to relocate to a state that doesn't have it, how much are you willing to work for that? And not a bad thing. If you choose to and you're comfortable, great. There might be other resources and support for you. But just knowing that certain geographic locations may be bound to certain laws and policy at the state level versus federal level that may make how they approach diversity, equity, and inclusion more accessible or not as accessible. So that's something I want to keep in mind for you, that sometimes policies in certain states may make an influence on your decision on where you want to go. And I did hyperlink the Crown Act. So if you're interested in learning more about that, there actually was a research study that was done by a group of career staff in other colleges across the country that actually looked at the influence of the Crown Act and how important it was for people who are on the job market. And it very much showcased how much more supported folks felt in being included in their sense of expression of natural hair versus the argument of having to look a certain way to fit into a company culture. So I thought that was really interesting. So you can read more about that and to hear the latest news on it. Mentor programs. If the company is dedicating to mentors and matching people, I think that's wonderful. Again, that comes down to resources, but some organizations have well-polished mentor programs that allow for individuals to say, I'm interested in being paired with somebody who, whether they identify very similar to me, or maybe they're further ahead in the organization and they can really help to ensure that they're like a safe space for you to talk with about your transitions. Part of it is a smart retention tool from the company to make sure that you feel you have a space that's not your supervisor to talk about things, but at the same time, it gives you an opportunity to really hear the ins and outs of maybe things that you just don't feel comfortable chatting with a supervisor because you just started. Mentor programs are really effective. Having run one and helping one of our programs at Rockefeller, I will tell you that they are very involved. Mentor programs can take a lot of time and a lot of resources, but they have such good intentions when they're given a good structure. So that's why I was going to say that depending on an employer, they may have the capacity to do this or not. But if they have one, it's great to ask questions about that. Reasonable pathways for promotion. This is really important. This would be something you could bring up in an interview, is just finding ways that they can elevate folks who are interested in pursuing certain pathways, making things more equitable. So for example, when I worked at the Capital District YMCA, if individuals who identified as people of color were interested in pursuing a CEO path, you wanted to be a CEO of one of the major Ys in the country, you actually could tell, even if you were a staff member doing hourly in childcare, for example, right? And you're like, I really want to become a CEO one day. You would work with your staff and they would put you on a path to CEO. And they actually had this whole curriculum laid out. How do you actually get from point A to point DE, whatever it is, and how do we train you on what you need to do to be a successful CEO in this organization? And they had this entire pathway mapped out. Now, again, that's all comes down to resources. You're going to hear me say that over and over again because some companies know how to do this really well and some haven't quite got there. But it's important to find out how do they make these accommodations to better support making those top level positions just as easily accessible to individuals of diverse backgrounds as people who don't identify as that population. So finding and inquiring about those is important. Sometimes those are involved in mentoring programs. Sometimes those are built into these intentional programs that help to build the necessary skills and support to get people to those higher level roles, but you want to look into those. Okay. Employer resource groups. So I actually put some on here and a little bit of prompting myself to tell you a little bit of stories about these and professional development opportunities. So some companies actually have what they call employer resource groups. So these are dedicated kind of affinity groups. Think of your experience when you were in college, right? Or if you're in college right now, when you got to join groups that were dedicated to, I'm thinking like when I was a student, I joined the Black and Latino Student Union, right? Well, in a place of employment, they may have certain groups dedicated to individuals who identify as like a woman resource group, a Hispanic resource group, a LGBTQ resource group. And it didn't matter if you identified with those individuals or not. Some people were just allies and wanted to support and wanted to be immersed and learn more and take more action, not just say I'm committed to being an ally, but I actually want to do something. How can I help? And they were joining these groups. And they do intentional programming, professional development. Maybe they did lunch and learn. Sometimes they did social activities, which I loved. The Women's Resource Group always did some really fun activities for Y staffers to get together. But it was just such a great way to also help us network with each other. And you didn't feel alone in your work, which I loved. So some companies get to do that. And I actually put on here, the YMCA locally and Deloitte Consulting all have resource groups. And so they say they have them, they actively have them engaged, and then staff run these. So these aren't like senior level staff. These are staff, these are your peers in a company who are running these. And you get an opportunity to say, I want to be involved too, and I want to take a stance. This is a great way to learn leadership and management and maybe even event planning, all those other great skills. But it's a good way to show support in a very actionable way as a company. I wanted to note here, highlight when I was at the Y was the Emily conference, and it's the, I think if I'm getting this right, Emerging Multicultural Leadership Experience. I haven't said that out loud in a while. So Emily conference was an eye-opener for me. So it was a conference that I was invited to my first year in my role, and it was an opportunity to bring, and I really didn't think, I never realized how powerful the experience was till I got there. It brought folks from all over the country who were people of color for a conference dedicated to how to build leaders of individuals who identified as Black, Hispanic, Asian, so on and so forth. I had never been in a room so empowered before. And at one point, I never realized that I had been in so many spaces with people who didn't look like me, that I actually realized when I was in a room with everyone that looked at me, I was in awe. I was like, oh my God, like, this is great. And like, I'm home. That's really what it felt like. But I really didn't realize that that was something that was missing for me. So I'm getting a little personal here, but I'm letting you know that sometimes those experiences can be really like throw you back for a minute to be like, wow, I never realized how important this was for me. And that conference, I got to attend at the national conference, and I got to be a part of the regional one. And what a fantastic experience, because they broke us out into smaller groups and we got to really dive into issues that were important to us. And again, we weren't alone. We had an opportunity to talk through our pain points, but then we got to talk about where do we go from here? How do we build each other up? How do we continue to keep each other strong and develop? And if you find companies that allow and are supportive of those kind of spaces, maybe they don't have an Emily conference, because that's very much a part of the YUSA model, but maybe other companies have something similar. That's a really powerful sign of their commitment and how they want to support that diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. So a good highlight. I'm happy to talk offline for folks who want to learn more about that. So some final things that I have for you, and I only have a few more points to share, and I'm happy to help answer questions. But also, you want to look at the marketing of how are they attracting diverse individuals in culturally appropriate ways. That may seem pretty intuitive, I would imagine, for most folks on this call, but knowing that you're looking at the materials that an employer is putting out there, whether it's flyers, whether it's pictures on their website, whether it's what they're tweeting, what their images look like, that can also send red flags if you find that how they're representing folks is concerning and doesn't look like what you would imagine someone like yourselves would be considered or captured. So it's something that you want to keep in mind. Also, there's organizations that contribute financially. Some companies are able to contribute financially to organizations that benefit certain individuals of certain backgrounds. And if you find out that they're committing to that, you may find that that's also a really good indicator of not only their commitment by action, but also by saying financially, we're taking this much of our budget and we're putting it into this, is really helpful. And it can make a big difference. And the last piece here as well, self-analysis, education, and training. A lot of companies, we were hearing it all summer. I know the University of Albany was doing this, and other units that I'm familiar with and other friends of mine who are working have gone through it, where they're dedicating to doing not only book clubs, but they're having people take implicit bias trainings. They're making people break out into smaller groups to have discussions of how are they feeling during these times, and to really talk through where do they want to move as a company and organization. So being mindful of how they're investing into this, because some companies may not even know where to start and how to, let me put an implicit bias training up on a web, for people to do it, but they haven't taken the time to really do the self-analysis to say, well, where are we right now? What do we need to know as a company that is making us think we have to advance and we have to grow to better inform education and training? And then the key here is recruitment and retention strategies. I don't know if you guys can hear my dog and her toy. Can you hear it? Yeah, a little bit. She always does this when I'm training. Hold on one second. Let me get it away from her. This is too funny. Hold on. She dropped it the minute I said something. Never mind. Okay, it's a Halloween donut if you guys are curious. So key here is recruitment and retention strategies. I think that's really important for you all to think about, because I gave you a lot very quickly, and that's why I said take these slides and digest them. I'm happy to talk with you more. Joan will too. I mean, it's a lot to take in, but I think a key point here is you're really looking at how are they attracting you as a candidate, and then how are they also retaining you? What kind of support once you're there? It's almost like the chicken and the egg, right? Either the company already has all these systems and support built in for folks, but then maybe they haven't pulled in the pipeline, or they're building in the pipeline and then realizing, oh my God, we don't have the support you need. And you might find yourself as an advocate to say, these are the things I need to be able to stay, to continue to be a thriving member of this company or organization, right? So it's just something to keep in mind here if you had to look at this from a much larger lens as a hiring manager. So how do you even take all of this information and digest it, right? Where do you go from here and how do you do all this work? Not too much different than what I mentioned in identifying legitimacy, but informational interviews with alumni and recruiters is also a fantastic way to do that. I know a lot the virtual career fairs the Uptown Career Office has coming up is a great way for you to have those times, whether you're in a group session with an employer, whether you're in one of the one-on-one, they're like 10-minute sessions with a recruiter to really talk through things. And those are very quick conversations, but it is another way to ask those intentional questions and gain some behind the scenes of what's important to them. And I actually have questions on the next slide to actually help you frame these, because I could see anyone saying, well, how do I actually ask about something that could seem so delicate? You got to ask. So I'm going to empower you with some words there. Networking, obviously, with your warm and cold network, which I talked about, and using your LinkedIn, but being able to identify folks, that's what I love about LinkedIn. You can go to a company's LinkedIn page and then you can see everybody that is working for them. And maybe you might find that there are some connections for people that are already on there, and you can contact them and set up a time to chat. Again, like I said, remember, a third of the company is remote right now. People are eager to have some type of connection, even if it's digital. So I wouldn't hesitate to reach out. Obviously, the websites that I've talked about, LinkedIn, Glassdoor, the company's website is a great way to do your research. But I will say that in something like this, I find that talking with people can really help to inform, because not everything is going to be put up on a website. Not everything's going to be worth mentioning. So you just want to make sure that you're doing your homework. And the interview process. There's specific questions that I pulled out from a Muse article. If you're not sure what the Muse is, awesome company, great articles. I know I love them. Maura loves them too. So I do recommend following them. I love their Instagram page and I love their website. So I wanted to share some of the great interview questions that I thought were great to mention. So when you're doing an interview and you want to ask questions about how to identify diversity, equity, inclusion, here's a few of them. What are your most important values as a company is, I think, a very broad but general question that anybody should be able to answer. Any recruiter who's seasoned in this work should be able to. And if they can't, then I'm like, okay, that gives me a little something to think about. How does this company promote diversity, right? What does that look like? Such a great question to ask. Joining an inclusive team is important to me. Naming your values upfront to the recruiter. How do you promote inclusivity on your team so all employees can succeed? That may sound like a very loaded question, but it's such an appropriate and well-informed one. You're letting them know, I want to work for an organization that values this. So can you tell me how you do this already? Great companies, organizations, small or big, if they know how to do this, this is a great time to show off and showcase how they've done this. How do you employ the member? Oops, I think I put a typo there. How do you, the members of your team? I think that one was really talking about how do you empower the members of your team? That's what I think that one was focused on, but I'll make sure that I check that when we send the slides to you. What are your plans for continuing to promote diversity and inclusion? That's great too, because some people have been doing this work for a while, but now they've been fine-tuning it, new resources are coming out. So maybe they're continuing to think about what's their next step. So that's a great follow-up question you can ask. And some other ones here too. Can you share data on your current employee diversity? That would actually be a question that you can actually ask the HR person. So sometimes you'll have different point of contacts in an interview process. Sometimes it's not the direct person that you're interviewing with. That's going to be your supervisor that will have this. But in an HR interview, when you're talking with them, they could actually share this information with you. So that's something that you could ask them about. What groups do you consider underrepresented, and how is the leadership team taking steps, to hire and empower people who fit into that category? What a great question about that promotion and pathways to further engage people and make sure that those positions that are much higher level are equitable for folks. What resources and/or benefits do you offer to support employees with, insert a certain identity there? What is it that would be important for them to know for you? What programs are in place to promote inclusion? Very simple question. And do your employees participate in diversity training, such as unconscious bias or cultural competency trainings? All very fair questions. A lot of you have probably done this type of training on your own individual time, but knowing that companies also continue this learning outside of an academic setting. So asking that is certainly a fair question. And what I love about the Muse article is they actually do share this. They have an infographic that actually says, on a phone interview, you can ask these questions. During an HR interview, you can ask these questions. For the person who's your hiring manager, this is what you can ask. So they actually do very good intention of trying to build a logical sense of why you would use these and when it's appropriate to use these. So I actually have the link for you in the final slide, so you can take a look at that to help you better informed and save these questions for yourself. Okay. So kind of coming to conclusion, I just want to open it up for the last few minutes we all have together, because again, like I said, I gave you a lot to think about. So I think couple key points, and these would be the top ones I would have you think about. Research and having intention and open conversations is key. You want to make sure that when you're doing your research, you're being able to think intentionally of what's important to you, and then having open conversations and not being passive in your search is important, because I find that like I said, not all the information may be readily available at your fingertips through a Google search or through a LinkedIn, but it certainly can help you when you're using the right resources to help frame your questions for follow-up. It's important to save your findings in your data, whether you want to use an Excel file or a Word doc, but I think when you're trying to make an informed decision of what employers are most important to you, especially if you're in the exploratory phase of your career path right now and you're not wedded or applying to anything just yet, just taking the time to find out who are those key employers you want to get involved with or would be interested in working for some point can give you a nice, almost like I would say like a Rolodex, kind of like your own internal data set of what are the employers I want to eye when jobs become available with their company. Obviously, you can always consult with the career office about your search and in any concerns you have. I've said that before, but also I want to leave you with this. And it was funny, I was talking to my husband about this last point, and I was like, I need another eye. Help me with another eye. So intentional conversations lead to informed decision making, which leads to, and I'm pretty sure the I that we came up with, and this is us going on our walk with our dog, intentional conversations lead to informed decision making, which leads to, I think I put in informed applying for jobs. Like, it helps you to be not only informed in your decision making of what companies, but it allows you to make sure that whatever effort you're putting in is going into the right action items. Because the last thing you want to do is apply for an employer, you think you know everything and then you don't, and then it leads to dissatisfaction on the job and you find yourself out on the job market again. So again, this is all equipping you with information to better support you. So my final slide, I think if anything, just shares a little bit more of some of our events that are coming up. So I don't mind leaving those, but those were the resources I wanted to share with all of you. They're all linked to the actual articles that I pulled a lot of information for today that I thought would be really helpful for all of you. So I will definitely share those. But I do want to open it up for conversations. And I will share these slides, but just giving you a preview of some more September events our career office and the larger career office is putting on. So just keeping in mind of those. But what questions do people have? And I don't mind putting those slides up again, but did anything come into the chat?
The chat is clear, so
Okay.
if anyone has questions now, feel free to.
Sure. Sure. So I guess one piece I could ask for folks, I know I can't see everybody, but was this information that you've heard before and you can shake your head no, or is this some information that's basically newer for you? It might be helpful to see. Somewhat newer. Okay, but that's good. You know, you might have known some things, so reiterated some points, and maybe some things were brand new, so that's helpful. Other thoughts?
I didn't know most of this stuff, so I thought it was really helpful.
Okay, good. Okay, yeah. You know, some of this is just not even, I would say, brand new information, but it definitely helps to streamline it and give you a little bit more practical way of like, how do I actually do this? I really wanted to make a kind of an infographic, a step-by-step guide to do that. So maybe that's something we'll work on for next year. Okay, so mostly new information. Sure, Madeline said the same thing, which is helpful. Good. Any other thoughts going into this? Anybody else wants to bring up? Oh, thanks, Marlene's like, great session. Thank you. That's great. You know, this is, oh, Ashley, yeah.
I actually took a course with Joan, I think it was 2 semesters ago, connected to my Statewide internship. So some of that kind of tied into what you were talking about in the beginning.
Good.
But I never gave much thought about like mentorship programs or if they have a budget dedicated to diversity inclusion. So it was really great to hear about that.
Oh,
Give me
yeah.
something to think about.
Yeah, and you know what, you'll find like there's some companies, like I know outside of my own position, I am a part of a larger company that does health and wellness, and they had a budget line dedicated to helping individuals who are very much focused on diversity, equity, inclusion. They had an entire budget line, and they were putting scholarships up there, and they were just backing themselves up with it. Another piece I didn't put on here that might be helpful for folks, I know some companies, it's called corporate social responsibility. That's actually a career path for people. So think about the staff members in your lives in higher ed who helped to organize all the community service events, and they got you out in the community to do things. Well, there's people whose sole job in a company is to help that company get their employees out there and using all of their knowledge and their resources and their talent, but to focus on a certain need. Same thing. CSR is for sure is actually an entire career path for people. I remember sitting in on a conference where somebody for Viacom, who owns MTV, and I'm sure other channel, maybe TV channels, they actually had a person who did this for the company. There was a private sector or public sector nonprofit who actually had this very streamlined in their organization. So it's really interesting because some organizations are starting to look more critically at not only if we're giving money and we have a mission statement, but how are we putting our face out in the community to actually show that we're actually doing something, not just sitting back and saying, I wrote a check. Because some people have reservations with just saying, oh, great, you have a budget line for something, or you gave away money, but what are you actually doing? So I think that that's also something that you could always look for and talk to alumni about, which is really helpful.